Okay. Am I understandable? Is my presentation shown up on? Okay, let's go. So I first give a short introduction of myself. So I'm from origin a technologist, and I've been over the last 10 years, for several years, working with memory institutes. And from there, I've became interested in their motives and in the way how they want to apply technologies. And I've also been publishing several things about that. I think one of the things what always comes to mind, and that's not only in memory institutes, but in general, I think it's all over the world. It's about are we all walking around the flavor of the day? And the flavor of the day in memory institutes can be at one time AI, linked open data, fair and open access, etc., etc. While lots of the things always have a tendency to turn around the real thing. Do you know what it's all about in your business? And do you have the motivation and also the competence to really return to your profession and how your profession and your business practice should develop in the future? And sometimes with lots of the flavor of the day type of subjects, although they are very valuable, because like I'm a technologist, I love artificial intelligence, machine learning. I think they all have a very great role in the future. Sometimes I have the idea that some of these flavor of the day subjects are sometimes even more motivated by funding agencies that try to push institutes into a certain direction for whatever political motives they have. But anyway, my presentation today will be about how we should think about applying the technologies, and especially applying the technologies in respect to the archival practices. If you look to what an archive is actually doing today, I think in contrast to what most people think in general, archives are the perfect destroyers of lots of memory. So the appraisal of government records is in this case also about selecting records that are worth keeping and discarding the rest. The destruction of paper archives is actually not a very old practice. It dates somewhere from the 19th century, and until then the paper production was not that high. So people were still keeping almost everything because in relative terms, the volume was not big enough to even consider to destroy it. However, in the middle of the 19th century, the volume grew and the limits of physical storage capacity became a legitimate reason for destroying non-current and non-used paperwork. And that's actually how it started to develop. And this entailed into a selection process, and state archivists were granted the dubious authority to appraise the selection and destruction of government records. Well, if you sort of transport that to today, in the digital world, this appraisal process urgently needs revision. First of all, the storage capacity is not a real issue. People want us to believe different, but it's not a real issue. And this fact undermines the argument for the need to destroy records. And secondly, the exponential growth of digital backlogs waiting for appraisal makes it an urgent issue in need for a solution or a different approach. And then the amazing thing is that there is the unshaken and baffling determination within the archival community that appraisal needs to be continued in the digital world. And it actually leads to a deadlock in the debate. With the emergence of artificial intelligence and the current drive to apply these technologies in all aspects of society, the big question is, will AI serve archivists' authority to destroy governmental records? Or will it serve the people's right to access government records now and in the future? So looking back at this slide, it's sort of, it depicts myself and my co-author. My co-author with whom I write is my partner. She's from origin an historian, so she's very much interested in keeping lots of information available for historians now and in the future. And I'm a technologist. And one of the things of the questions we want to put forward is there such a need to select and destroy born digital records? Because actually and also in my presentation, I only talk about born digital. I don't talk about digitized content. I don't talk about all legacy and backlogging paperwork, etc. It's for me a different subject. I talk about born digital content. And the arguments are threefold, namely the storage capacity problems and the associated costs, the retrieval problem, and the long-term access problem. From the technological perspective, storage is currently and in the foreseeable future not a significant cost issue if one uses offline storage technologies rather than spinning disks. The most expensive part of archiving is ingest and pre-ingest, because these processes are highly overloaded with human intervention and decision-making moments, such as appraisal. Retrieval becomes a cost issue if the records are described beforehand and if you require the highest granularity level and with the highest quality metadata. But essentially, retrieval only requires basic inventory and technical metadata to identify, locate, and access the records. And this does not need to be too expensive. Adequate technical solutions for long-term access have been devised and tested. And I know in the archive community, because I talked with many archives over the last years, I think emulation virtualization is not very popular because they want everything into their own archiving system. But they are feasible options. And even if not implemented yet, they can be implemented in the future when the demand for access justifies it. The arguments for selecting and destroying born digital records are presented as a technological disguise with a high price tag. And you hear people saying, to justify heavy selection and mass destruction, the rhetoric goes as follows. User-friendly archives have to be able to provide immediate 24/7 access to records and to provide fast, accurate, and easy retrieval, which is a recipe for incurring high costs. This is the setting the expectation so high, and this will make it impossible for archives to safeguard the records in the first place. Because the emphasis lies on immediate and online access, securing sustainable funding for mass line off storage is not even on the agenda. And even though it's relatively affordable and secure. And again, from my partner's perspective, a historian perspective, destruction of historical evidence is the worst thing that can happen. Obviously, if evidence is well kept, well described, and easy accessible, history is made easy. But the most interesting, most innovative histories have been written based on evidence that wasn't selected for safekeeping and that wasn't necessarily kept under the best conditions. Historians and archaeologists have not spared cost nor efforts in reconstructing history based on scanned and half-destructed evidence. This shows that for history, keeping evidence is more important than selecting, describing, and curating it. So let's take a closer look at the characteristic of born digital records. This will help us understand why current archival practices are not suited to process them. First of all, one cannot see and assess what information is kept in a digital information system, be it an email system, a database, or a document management system, unless the system is up and running. However, without seeing its content, one can be sure that such a system comes into archival custody. Its content is structured the way it was used by the governmental office it originates from. And thus the system is an artifact that totally complies to the principles of provenance and original order, which the archival profession values so high. It represents an integral and organically grown corpus of evidence that an archival should preserve as a whole. There are many built-in dependencies in such system. So in email systems, you have folders, address books, calendars, to-do list. An email message is embedded in systems with rich contextual data and relations. There are also lots and lots of duplicates in email threads. The number of duplicates say something about the importance of relevance of a given message. All this makes an email message very different from a handwritten letter from the 17th century. Yet archivists tended to consider email messages like letters for a very, very long time. They try to process them as such. And this process is not scalable. And above all, when considering it like that, there is an incredible lot of valuable context lost if you extract emails from their native system. And why try to select and appraise the information sitting in such systems, extract it from its native environment, transfer it into some standard archival format, and store it in an archival system? It makes very little sense. Basically, all these steps run counter to the requirement of preserving the provenance, the context, and the integrity of the records. In other words, to keep records without an alteration that would impair its use and authentic record. So digital artifacts were once a living ecosystem. And you could also consider them as a snapshot of a living ecosystem. So you can see in this slide the ruins of Pompeii. It could also have been have recorded its own history and contain very rich historical information. Think of taking a snapshot of Facebook, for example, and preserving it as an artifact dating from the 21st century. It could become similar to Pompeii, a well-preserved site that gives us rich and full snapshots of daily life in a Roman city, and in Facebook case of how we live virtually today. In the future, accessing digital artifacts might be very similar to excavating archaeological sites like Pompeii, depending on the research question, the funding and technologies available. Historians and digital forensic experts will be able to excavate the layers of bits and document everything very carefully. And the good news is that unlike with archaeological sites, digital excavation will not destroy any of the original data, because it will all be done on a copy of the original artifact. This once more underlines the importance of keeping the original digital artifact intact. One would hope that archivists would realize that their appraisal methods are destroying original evidence and context, which cannot be reconstructed. Because similar to the analog world, in the digital world, destroying is a one-time operation. Archiving practices apply to born digital records entail the same risks as archaeological excavation. One would hope that archivists would realize the truth in what the new director of the Pompeii said recently in an interview with The Guardian. We can't exclude that in the future there will be new methods and new possibilities, so we should leave something for the future generations. So the next picture, what we see here, shows the archive of Lenexa, Kansas. And can you imagine how this would look like in a digital archive? The question, what comes next for artificial intelligence in archives, boils down to, are we going to deploy AI to destroy or to unlock born digital archives? Archivists will need to go back to their mission statement or to the original mission. Where are they for? What's their role in life? Is it to be the judge of what becomes a record for the future? Or is it to be the guardian of the fullest historical record for the future? AI is just a technology, like many other technologies, and they can all be very helpful in professions. And it can help archivists move in both directions. But policymakers are pushing AI and big data and making huge amount of money available to use AI. And archivists feel pressed to make choices. Surprisingly, sometimes things actually move in a surprising way. You see that even big consortia take different directions. It's like the EU-funded project, The Time Machine, which aims to digitize an enormous volume of historical, geographic, museum and library archives. And with more than 100 archives in Europe participate in this flagship program. And the vision is that digitization and computing infrastructure will push artificial intelligence to a new level with revolutionary interpretive models and will lead to consolidated version of our historical knowledge of our analog past. One cannot help but wonder how we can build historical knowledge of our digital past when archives are not taking up the challenges of safekeeping our born digital records. So I would like to conclude that I think that AI, machine learning, big data, data mining, and forensics, and probably potentially other technology in the future can really shine a light on archives. I think the fact is that a digital archive probably is best served if you first store it as a dark archive, use the technologies to explore that dark archive and make it available for future generations without touching it too much and without following too much of the things that are more politically motivated, like having it immediately accessible, what actually makes the cost of having such an archive far too high, and what would force an archivist into destroying lots of the data. And I think with all these technologies, we can apply existing storage technology to keep born digital archives for future users. And we can research emerging technologies, and that can be anything from AI to any future type of technologies for unlocking and retrieval. And that's why I wanted to conclude with.